intro screen. Oh, thank you. As you can see there on the intro screen, I'll be doing the why and Cameron will be talking about the how. We're committed to providing some practical tools for everyone in attendance tonight on how to actually put some of what we talk about into action. There's nothing worse than going to a session, I think, and hearing all kinds of good things, but with no way of actually putting those into place. So I'm going to move straight into it now. Hit us up with your questions either during or maybe we'll answer those towards the end, depending on what it is. But yeah, so I'm going to talk about the why. It's a little bit, straight to quote the castle, the vibe of it, it's a little bit Marbo. It's all the philosophical things as to why we want to kind of have these discussions and open up this conversation between techs and their board or staff or both. So firstly, how do you define tech? So I would encourage everyone to not be too narrow in how the way they define technology. It's not just broadcast technology. It's also IT, web platforms, playout systems, acoustics within your station. You know, it's kind of anything that anyone's managing there that has a technical bent towards it. And the more you include in your definition, the more people you'll be able to actually invite into your tech team. And letting people into your tech team, I know it's a risk and it does take time, but in the end, it will be worth it. It's been really great for us at 3MGR to broaden our tech team for more than just one person. So bridging the gap. So at every station, the techs have a choice. I think they can lock all the equipment down to its minimal possible use. Or allow free and open use and know that fixes will need to be done. Pretty much fixes will need to be done either way. But, you know, I totally understand both of those approaches and I'm not here to say which one's right or wrong. But this is the choice that you have and it potentially sets a scene for more than just the tech at your station as well. I think each of these boards mentioned, each of these groups mentioned here, the boards, the staff, the techs, the presenters and other volunteers all have a different relationship with the technology at your station. So it's really important to start bringing these groups together to understand how the technology can work across each user group, I guess. So yeah, community radio can't happen without the technology or the people who can effectively harness the technology to serve the needs of the station and the broader community that a station exists to serve. Essentially, techs are there to provide the tools and the platform for the content creators to create the content, to engage the listeners and other community members so that your station is vibrant and full of life and great content and things like that. So sometimes I think boards and staff and even presenters forget the role that technology actually has in providing them with a platform. So sometimes it is about gently reminding them that without, you know, necessary equipment and maintenance and things like that, that radio actually doesn't happen. But it's about how those conversations happen and come some of the choices that come before those conversations, I think. This one is a big one. So tech is often seen as an existential threat by station leadership. Station leadership mostly don't really understand tech unless you're lucky to have a technologist on your board or in your station leadership. Not just how it works, but also what it costs. And this is your biggest role as a station tech. Your station leadership doesn't have to understand exactly how the tech works per se, but they do need to understand your station's tech story, what equipment you have, how old it is, what its maintenance and redundancy plan is, what the station's options are for future purchases. Don't be offended by their reluctance to not understand how everything works. They are mostly not RF engineers or communications technologists sitting on boards, but do understand that they love the station and want it to be on air and delivering great content to their community. And don't forget that they're volunteering their time as a board member as well as yourself as a technologist who are often volunteering. Yeah, so as a technologist, you should be a facilitator and an enabler. The tech you wrangle should meet your station's needs and provide a springboard for your content creators. Michaela, I think we had a couple of polls that we were going to do.
Yeah.
Do I need to stop sharing my screen for that?
Nope, I can launch it right now.
That would be ace. Thank you very much. So these polls are just to help us understand who we've kind of got in the room. So if everyone could answer that one. So what your role is at the station, if you're a station tech, in station management, a board or committee member, or another volunteer, that would be fantastic. Just so we kind of know. We're assuming, which you should never do, because, you know, that makes an out of you and me, that whole old saying. We're assuming it's mostly text, but it might not be. Hopefully some board members have come as well. And so do we think we've had most responses, Michaela?
Yeah, looks like we've got 20 of 24.
Okay.
So we're nearly there.
Nearly there. We'll give it another couple of seconds and we'll just move on to the next one. I should hum some like music.
Some elevator music.
Some elevator music, some hold music, some thinking music.
All right. So we have 87% voted. Shall we end?
Yeah, let's end.
Excellent. All righty.
And the next one, please.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you. And this one, so who have we got? Text.
So this is our
board
results.
members. Fantastic. Some station management and lots of volunteers. Oh, that's fantastic.
Excellent.
So I'm assuming nearly everyone is a volunteer who's come on, half, and half board and half tech. That's fantastic. It kind of just helps us understand who we're talking to as we go through our presentation. So if you could move on to the next poll, that would be awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, let's launch poll number 2.
All right, so this will just close off the other one well and truly. I'm going to assume it's going to be about 60-40 maybe from what we had, but maybe not.
All right, great. We've pretty much got everyone
excellent
voted.
All right. So were they mostly, 90. Okay, cool. 85. Awesome. Okay. Thank you very much, Michaela. So, knowing that we've got a 50-50 split of technologists and committee members / board members and a couple of staff is really excellent. Thank you everyone for coming along. And hopefully this will help open up some conversations between you all, which would be the best thing. All right, so moving right along. As the only technologist at a small community station, you are the technical department pretty much rolled into one single person. That means that you can make a more effective contribution if you bring other skills other than your hands-on and experiential technical chops to the task. So some of these being, and this is what Cameron will touch on much later with a lot more of the how these things kind of happen. So you might have to be a bit of a manager. You might have to, take care of finance and, things like that. You might have to be a project planner. You might have to be a project manager as well. And you might need to be a quantity surveyor in terms of understanding the role of tech, what you've got at your station, how it's all functioning, things like that. Or there's a big or, you could work in a tech team with other people who bring these skills to the table, which is what we do at 3MDR. So we have our head technician, who is the long-term experienced, knowledgeable technical person. And when I first started at 3MDR about 7 years ago, our station manager was quite engaged with the tech side of things in terms of trying to understand broadcast technology, and he really dove in and made a really big effort to understand how those things worked, which I think was really excellent for our head tech. So Phil has been at our station in a station manager role for about 10 years. So that's been really good. When I started 7 years ago, I kind of amped that up another level. And over the time, I've kind of inserted myself as a little bit of a triage person between tech and the board and things like that to kind of start this process of having those communication lines open. We also did things like stopped our head technician paying for everything because unfortunately, communications had not always gone successfully in the past. Mostly bigger items, yes, but lots and lots of those smaller items he had ended up just purchasing himself. So we definitely started, putting those into grant grant applications and, you know, just trying to really understand the actual cost of having tech at the station and what, you know, we needed to be planning for and trying to budget for and things like that. So yeah, we stopped him paying for nearly everything. And look, he's an eBay ninja. So he was getting things at very reasonable prices, but still forking out for them himself, which is unacceptable. Even at a completely volunteer run organization, you can't just have people shelling out their own money, you know, for items all the time. It also means that you don't really have a handle, I guess, on what your station's actually costing you to run. So you could be putting in a lot bigger dollar amount in your grant applications and things like that. We also reached out to a few of our other presenters, other volunteers, and one in particular has a whole lot of acoustics knowledge and used to do a lot of soldering and wanted to start soldering again. So we just literally skilled him up again. I learned how to solder. I started getting my ham radio license. It didn't come to fruition yet, but you know, that's one way that I could try and learn about things and stuff like that. I do a lot of the project management as well at the station. So we kind of developed a whole tech team. And then we had a couple of other tech volunteers who have come in from the general community. They've moved to the area and things like that. So I have to say our head technician was very reticent to let other people work on gear, because he was like, it's going to take me twice as long because you're going to have a go and then it's going to be broken and then I'm going to have to fix it anyway and I'm going to have to show you and all that kind of stuff. But we got there. I just kind of wore him down. I did some finicky tasks quite well. So then he was like, okay, this person's worth putting a bit of time into. So I understand the challenges that happen with techs and other volunteers and things like that as well. But now he loves it. Now things happen at the station without him even needing to know about it. You know, we just say, oh, we've repaired those CDs, or I swapped that one over, or we've booked these bits of equipment in for servicing or whatever. And it's actually taken a massive load off his plate. And also you shouldn't ever have one point of failure at a station if you can possibly avoid it. I know it's really hard in volunteer run stations, but if you can at least have two people who kind of know what the go is and, you know, could fill in for each other, or at least have a little bit of knowledge, that's always a really kind of wise way to look at things. So yeah, we now have a tech team at the station, and it's working really well. And it means that we don't have to have one tech being the whole technical department. It's just something to think about. And my last point on this one, recognize that being invited to a board meeting is a good thing, even if it doesn't go well the first time. And it might not go well the first time. But being invited to the board to sit at that table and understand how tech, you know, works as part of the station is, I think, a really big compliment. That's your board reaching out to you and trying to get you to come to the table and bring your knowledge and bring, you know, everything that you know about what's happening in tech at the station and things like that. Probably don't turn up to your first meeting and hit them with, we need these $100,000 worth of equipment. That might not be the best way to go. But if you also need that $100,000 worth of equipment, you know, you might want to work that in to the grant calendar, so you know when they need to have that information and things like that. But Cameron will go into a lot more about that later as well. But yeah, it's not supposed to be a drag. They're not pulling you to a meeting for the sake of a meeting or anything like that. Look at it as a positive, make of it, you know, what you can, and understand where the station's trying to head as well, and how your role as a head technician fits into that journey as well, would be my advice if you possibly can. Recognize and understand that presenters are petrified, daunted, scared, however you want to put it, of station tech, yet very motivated. They turn up every week to present their program, often doing hours of prep. So we have presenters at 3MDR who won't even turn a computer off and on. You know, you've got to be there on the phone, or you've got to be there in person with them, even though they would do it at home, and they understand that that breaks what's going on, potentially the loop of the tech getting stuck and the things. And you see, I'm quite technological, as you can hear, and all that kind of stuff. But you know, they just won't do it at the station. They're so petrified of breaking something. So, and that's not what I want at our station. I want them to feel confident to be able to turn a computer off and on again to get it going, you know, like, so, you know, don't underestimate how petrified they are of all that stuff. And they don't want to break it. They know that it's someone else's volunteer time that it's going to take to fix it. They don't want to break it. Having said that, They should also never blame themselves. They should also never blame techs or tech gear failures on air. It is a pet hate of mine, and it's something that every station needs to work at. It's not okay for the presenters to blame the equipment on air. It's almost always operator error. And I do think this is something worth talking to your committee and your presenters at your station about. Not only is it untrue that the tech has failed, mostly, it's disrespectful to the tech and the equipment and all the people that are putting in time and effort to make sure that your content creators have a vehicle to have their shows going out to their audience. And your board and your presenters do need to understand that you take pride in your work, and it hurts when you and or your equipment are blamed for the presenter's shortcomings. So I do think that is something worth talking to your presenters and your boards about. I'm constantly saying it at 3MDR. You know, would you say that if the technician was standing in front of you, would you blame him for your equipment not working? And they're always like, oh, well, no. And I'm like, well, don't do it then. Like, it's not fair. Even he does it, but he does it trying to be ironic. But even now that I'm on the tech team and I sit in the same room as him when we do our show, he gets told off by me because I'm like, no, don't blame the equipment. I put that CD player in place. Don't blame that. It's your fault, not mine. So I do think that that is a conversation worth having. And yeah, you know, like techs have feelings too. I should have done a hashtag techs have feelings too. And it's really important to respect their place within that kind of dialogue at your station. But techs don't own station gear. So that's, you know, I'm trying to give you a bit of yin yang through this presentation. So they don't own the station gear. It's communal property paid for with stakeholder funds, whether that be your sponsorship revenue, whether it be fundraising, your subscriber drives, membership drives, all of those kinds of things, whether it's a grant fund. You know, this is communal property and everyone should be looking out for it and should be looking after it. You know, you cannot guard every CD player like your life depends on it as a tech. They're going to get broken. They're used, I don't know, CD players are still used really heavily at 3MDR. So they are going to fail. They're going to need new, you know, tray mechanisms. They're going to need laser readery things and like all that kind of stuff. It is going to happen. There is nothing you can do to stop that. So as in the words of Frozen, let it go. Just let them use it. And when it stops working, then we're going to have to figure out repairing it or replacing it. They're not doing it on purpose. Like the amount of times we found like two CDs in a CD player, or they've been jammed like in between in the rack, you know, but it won't spit my CD out. And you're like, But they don't want to come to you. And I will often find 2 or 3 others in there. So there's 2 or 3 other presenters who have not told us that they've lost a CD because they're so petrified that they might have broken something. So, you know, it's all about everyone understanding how things work. So within that, it is the tech's responsibility to maintain it in working order. The end user's responsibility is to learn how to use it effectively and to treat it and the people who maintain it with respect, which basically just is my whole last rambling-y bits, all succinctly put in one point. Now, this is my challenge to the techs, but also the board members in the room, because I feel like sometimes presenters and other volunteers at your station might not know who you are either. Spend as much time as possible outside the broom cupboard or storeroom that doubles as your workshop. Even if you're lucky enough to have a workshop that's not at your house. I'm sure lots of people take gear home and fix it at home. But yeah, spend some time at the station. Look for opportunities where you can meet other people who are involved at the station and have conversations. It's that whole water cooler thing. It's how you understand what's going on at the station and how people can get to know you. You're not just that ethereal tech man that kind of does things like, you know, magically in the dark when no one's there. You know, you want people to know who you are. Maybe they'll stop blaming you for stuff if they know who you are and they like you as a person. Understand the problem from the end users and business leaders' perspectives. This is a big one for me. A head technician happens to be a long-term presenter as well, and I 100% think that gives him a really fantastic insight into how the equipment has to work. So if you don't present a show at the station, I would really encourage you to maybe at least go through the training or sit in on a show or 2 or something like that. Especially if you're thinking of changing something in a studio, or you're getting some feedback that's, you know, ergonomically it's not working or something like that, even though it's beautiful and you've put in at this amazingly great place that you love. potentially it's not working for the presenters. So I think that understanding how presenters use the equipment is really, really important to you doing your job as your station tech, like, fantastically well, and they will love you for it as well. You know, if they understand that you get it, and that, you know, you've done a show where you've done the training and you understand how a studio needs to work, then that's going to do wonders for your relationship with presenters as well. So yeah, I would definitely challenge you to, look at things from a presenter's point of view. And the business leaders part, that's about knowing things like a grant round. Like, when is a grant round due? What do I need to provide them so they can put that really expensive piece of gear into their grant application? Do we need 3 quotes? What are the thresholds for, you know, money and things like that? So it's also about you understanding how at your station, whether your board or your staff or both, have timelines that they need you to submit things by and stuff like that. So it's a little bit about just being part of the whole station community, I guess. So the station's probably never had to pay for a digital desk or an OB van. It's to improve the station's sound and in-studio presenter experience, and to better engage with the community beyond the station walls. So I think this is leading into my very last point, which is a really, really important one. And it is around that you're a member of your station's community. There should be no place in your practice for my way or the highway. And that also goes to, it's not your role at your station to build like a tech wonderland of all the amazing things that could be in a radio station if your presenters aren't going to use it, or your station can't afford it, or the next person who comes along to try and do a voluntary tech role can't fix it. So there's a whole lot to kind of take into account in terms of why techs and board members should be speaking to each other a little bit more. But I would just like to finish by saying, we don't have radio without you. And I appreciate every single one of you who is a technician at a community radio station, the majority of whom are unpaid volunteers and do lots and lots of hours. But please come and join the rest of us in our station community, and, you know, play as a team, and let's just make our stations work really well for each other. And yeah, I hope to be able to meet lots of you if I haven't met you already. We're hoping that CBAA conferences and Technorama conferences and things like that will be happening. So yeah, come up and say hello. But I hope that little why, the vibe of it, Marbo, has got you kind of going for why this needs to happen. And I'm going to hand over to Cameron, and he's going to smack you between the eyes with the how, which I think is super important. So thank you everyone so much, and I'm done.
Don't know about the eye smacking. And I make no apology for the fact that I'm a technician, and so therefore my slides are far more prosaic than Ren's were. I'm Cameron. I got my start at technology and being a tech while volunteering at a community station when I was a teenager. 40-something years later, I have a full-time gig as the technologist on the management team at Triple R in Melbourne. And in between, I've spent a lot of time helping businesses, large and small, harness technology to achieve their objectives. Ren's broken some of the ground on this Technorama Tuesday by exploring the essential reasons why station techs and boards should be talking to each other. And I think everyone in the room, you wouldn't be here otherwise, acknowledges that sometimes that communication isn't as smooth or as frequent as it should be. So my contribution is going to focus on the how. But there's always a but, isn't there? It won't be a recipe. I'm sorry, we don't have time, and neither do I. But what I'm going to try and do is to give you a somewhat structured set of talking points that I hope will stimulate your thinking and provide some conversation starters to take back to your station's community. If questions occur to you, don't be shy about shooting them through to Michaela while I'm talking. And if we've got time at the end, we'll have a crack at answering them. and I'm sure Michaela can forward them to me, and I won't promise to answer every question that you ask, but I'll give it a crack. All of the things I will talk about have been successfully employed in my professional practice. Many are essential to my role at Triple R. I've been in the sector for a long time, so I understand the raison d'etre of community media. I also understand that it's quite different to that of commercial media and for-profit enterprises. Therefore, much of what is called best practice is poorly matched to not-for-profit organisations operating on a shoestring with largely volunteer labour forces. That said, there's still much we can learn from how successful businesses organise and operate. And I'll bring a few of those ideas to you tonight. I'll try to avoid talking about specific tech, though I will use familiar things by way of illustration. While a specific technology may not be applicable to your station, the principle I'm using it to illustrate probably will be. So I'd like to spend a few moments deconstructing the webinar topic. When we say talking, we really mean communicating. And the problem that techs often face is how to be understood and how to make their communication effective. It's been a long time since I had to address a meeting of a board. When Ren and Hannah first pitched the idea of this webinar, my initial reaction was to disqualify myself. I'm fortunate to work for a big station, and I have a layer of decision makers between me and our board. To be sure though, I contribute to decisions my station makes about technology. I just don't talk to the board members about it. So how might techs make their communication effective? I'd avoid jargon and technobabble for a start. Jargon can be helpful shorthand when talking to other techs. It can be confusing or misleading when communicating with others. Strive to be brief and to the point. We sought 3 quotes. The one we prefer is 2% more than the cheapest, but the supplier is local and can provide timely support. Gather evidence to support advice about significant decisions. Your experience should be harnessed to evaluate all applicable options. Present your advice, recommendations and plans from a business point of view. I'll come back to this point. Apply structure to your communications. Eschew the conventional approach and put the bottom line first. Readers should not have to dig deep to mine essential decision support information from your submissions. Negotiate some autonomy with station leadership. Establish a clear understanding of when you can act and how much you can spend without the need for consultation. Autonomy seldom comes without a cost, so ensure you understand and comply with whatever is necessary to document your decisions. The effectiveness of your communication will be amplified by trust. Demonstrate that you understand your station's mission. Ensure that your advice and decisions are always aligned with that mission. Which kind of brings us to who we're communicating with. I think the term board is too specific. It's your station's decision makers that you need to communicate effectively with. And I'll use the term station leadership as the collective term for those decision makers. I've pulled the topic apart and identified the important ingredients. A restatement might be effectively communicating with station leadership about tech. But that's pretty unwieldy. It barely fits on the slide. And to be honest, it's not as punchy as the webinar topic. I have an alternative, but before I propose that, I'd like to spend a moment on a numbers game. We'd all like to have technically literate peers and higher ups. When that's not practical, i.e. most of the time, turning this around so that we think more in terms of business literate techs might be a workable alternative. This is a no-brainer from a pure numbers point of view. Raising and maintaining the technical literacy of a station community and its leadership is a massive task. It's a never-ending task too. Leadership induction tools like videos and documents can never hope to cover tech topics in detail sufficient to allow leaders to understand factors that are essential to decisions about tech. Even if you embark on a program to raise tech literacy, you're condemned to start over again whenever there's a change in station leadership. And at smaller stations with volunteer committee members, that can be quite often. The alternative is to raise the business literacy of one or two station techs. This approach has the potential to improve the effectiveness of communication without it requiring endless repetitive effort. So let me reword the topic. What I'd like to do from here on in is to whet your appetite for some business literacy and to show how it might contribute to solving the problem we're discussing this evening. If as technologists we think and operate in a business-focused manner, we can eliminate or reduce the challenge of effective communication with our station's decision makers. One of your jobs is to advise station leadership on affordable, business-sensible ways to achieve strategic objectives. We're all great problem solvers. However, many technical problems are best tackled with planning and research rather than hand tools. Let's consider planning then for a few moments. Plans should be part of any business practice. They help define and communicate our objectives, and they lay out the path to achieving those objectives. They allow us to assess and provision necessary resources. The overarching plan is the strategic plan. Typically, it's formulated after consultation with the whole station community. It establishes a station roadmap for 3 to 5 years. It might include lofty words such as champion and strategic and sustainable. Strategic plans, though, tend to articulate the 3 W's of our station's operation: why, what, and when. A 5-year strat plan might set a goal to become more sustainable by reducing dependence on operational funding from the Shire Council and the CBF. Subordinate goals might be to increase revenue and reduce utility costs. In this example, our 3 W's are why, reduce dependence on external funding bodies; what, increase sponsorship revenue by 20%, reduce utility costs by 10%, and when, revenue increase of 4% per year and cost reduction of 2% per year. And you may be thinking, there's not much technology in there. Operational plans deal with the how and the how much. They are typically specific to a department. They tease out the implementational detail of the strategic plan, and they must always be aligned with the what and the when. Often, operational plans of multiple departments will address pieces of the same strat plan puzzle. To labour my previous example, the tech team hows might involve upgrading the PC used by the sales team so that they can generate more revenue, and replacing the fluoro tubes and halogen downlights with LED equivalents to reduce utility costs. The how much question can be mostly answered by getting quotes from suppliers. This work would appear in a tech operational plan because techs are best equipped to address essential questions of PC capability and required LED light output. Technology planning must be aligned with the strat plan. However, it's primarily focused on acquisition, maintenance, and replacement of station infrastructure, hardware, and software. Best results will be achieved if tech work is separated into 2 piles. Projects like the PC upgrade and LED lighting examples, and business as usual. Don't overlook business as usual when documenting your plans. I call this kind of stuff dial tone, which is a metaphor that encapsulates both the end user expectation and the disproportionate amount of technology and human effort required for someone to pick up the phone and be able to place a phone call. Perhaps the most important difference between project work and dial tone is that dial tone tasks invariably need to be given priority. It is somewhat pointless to deliver the new LED lights on time if spots haven't been played for 3 days due to playout system malfunction. Technology plans should allocate adequate financial and human resources to both dial tone and project work. Determining what adequate means is more science than black art, and as technologists, we should be pretty good at science. Techs are best placed to break down the cost of technology and to advise station leadership on ways to minimise expenditure while meeting your service obligations and community expectations. When offering this advice, always consider the human effort required to produce a unit of money. How many subscriptions, air minutes, or sausage sizzles does a turntable cartridge, microphone, computer, or transmitter cost your station? Station leadership needs to know how much it costs to run the station and keep it on air. Aside from wages, technology and the energy it consumes constitutes a significant proportion of that cost. If your station doesn't have paid staff, tech may be the most significant cost. Operating expenses are what a station needs to spend to keep broadcasting. In the tech domain, this is the cost of dial tone. Capital expenses are typically the purchase price of things like computers, CD players, and transmitters. Eventually, these things need to be replaced. Sometimes we need to acquire more of the items we already have when we're fitting out a new studio. All of our big ticket capital items have an operational life. At the end of that lifetime, funds must be available to replace the item. Sometimes it's useful to distribute the cost of replacement over the lifetime of the item. For example, an $800 computer with an operational life of 4 years can be thought of as costing $200 a year. And setting aside $200 each year might be easier than raising $800 at the time the computer needs to be replaced. Whether you actually set aside the money or not, amortizing your capital in this way surfaces the true year-on-year cost of your tech. Buying stuff isn't an end in itself. Commissioning, maintaining, and replacing tech requires human effort. When quantifying and costing human resources, a clearer picture emerges if activities are separated into different piles. The most important of your resource requirements is whatever is necessary to maintain your dial tone. This is what enables your sales team to keep generating revenue and your presenters to keep putting their programs to air. Insufficient resources in this area will inevitably result in unplanned disruption to your station's operation. Maintain a record of how much effort is required for common tasks and how frequently they need to be performed. Use this record to establish your dial tone resource allocations and to help identify time sponges that could be eliminated. Each project tends to have different resource requirements. These should be quantified and provided for within individual project plans. Whatever is required to deliver a project should be additional to the resources needed to maintain dial tone. Don't rob your dial tone budget to achieve project deliverables. Project work must coexist with dial tone. Failure to maintain dial tone is a significant contributor to failure of essential systems. And unexpected failures are the natural enemy of on-time, on-budget project delivery. Where they're meaningful, add hourly rates. Knowing that the fit out of a new studio will require 10K of equipment is useful. Knowing that it will also require 100 hours of human effort costed at $50 an hour reveals that the true cost of the project is more likely to be $15,000. It's okay to employ free labour to complete a project. It's not okay for project plans to assume that labour is free. In the latter case, if the free resource is unavailable when needed, the project will blow out in time if it must pause until that resource becomes available. It will blow out its budget if the resource needs to be paid so that the project can be completed on time. It takes time and effort to do the things I'm advocating. This must be acknowledged when determining resource requirements. It will be helpful to capture the breakdown of these things in a tech budget. I use a spreadsheet for this type of work because it simplifies and codifies the summaries that leadership needs for inclusion in station budgets. I've spoken a bit about the life cycle of tech items. How do we manage replacement at the end of life? Everyone who's attending tonight has experienced tech fail. Obviously, we'd prefer that failures aren't disruptive. This is achievable, but with effort and planning. Your budget should capture the cost of maintaining your tech and replacing items at end of life. Be proactive. Try to establish a plan B for every situation where continuity is essential. It's your station leader's responsibility to establish what essential means. Don't strive to minimize downtime or achieve high availability in domains where they're not relevant or make no financial sense. For example, by spending significant capital on a spare when typical times to repair or replace the failed item are shorter than the time for the impact of its unavailability to be noticed. Tech assets have different life cycles. The centerpiece of each RRR broadcast studio is a 30-year-old analog console. Our 12-year-old CD players were replaced 5 years ago, so they've got a few years left to run. Studio computers, there's 2 in each of our studios, have all been replaced in the last 3 years, and I plan for them to be in service for another 4. Avoiding what I'll call end-of-life collisions, which occur when multiple assets reach end of life at the same time, requires careful management. Distributing asset replacement over time is essential for controlling workload and levelling your budgeted expenditure. To help you keep on top of this, create and maintain a technology replacement plan. It could be integrated with your asset register, but a separate spreadsheet will probably serve you better. Mine's actually distributed across several spreadsheets, which is far from ideal. A single row for each asset should suffice. Create a new row when you acquire new kit and record the date and purchase price. The next one's a bit tricky, but you won't need a crystal ball. Drawing on your experience and that of other station techs and the records of assets that have been replaced should get you into the ballpark. For an estimate of replacement cost, round the list price up to the nearest power of 10. Don't assume that any discounts you received on the initial purchase will be offered at replacement time. Logging each asset's breakdown and maintenance history allows you to tweak the replacement date. Keeping track of how long electromechanical and other devices have been in active service is also useful for predicting failures and adjusting replacement dates. There's a simple tool that can be integrated into your replacement plan or used to prioritize dial tone or project work. It's called risk analysis. Risk analysis is a simple arithmetic game that can be surprisingly useful as a prioritization and decision support tool. Decisions are driven by what's often called a risk score. It's actually the product of 2 factors. Numerically, factors should be large enough so that there aren't too many ties in the set of risk scores. but avoid large ranges because they encourage hair splitting, and in my experience, they aren't particularly revelatory. Experience and knowledge of your environment and the number of risks you're tracking can help you get the number right. For a first cut, use a scale of 3 or 5. A 3-level scale is simple for everyone to get their head around. Risks are either low, medium, or high. Scores and their factors can be combined with the asset data I've been encouraging you to collect. A risk register, like the one on this slide, uses the scores to identify and communicate activity and expenditure priorities. The register can be a standalone document or integrated with your station's assets register or technology plans. I find a spreadsheet useful because the risk scores can be calculated automatically and the rows can be trivially sorted. Here's the same table, sorted from highest to lowest score. The actual values of the scores are not particularly significant. However, they provide you with an indication of how urgently an asset or facility requires your attention. Clearly, in this example, the highest priority should be given to mitigating the unreliability of the utility power at the transmitter site. It's about time for me to wrap up, so we've got some space for your questions. But the nub of what Ren and I have talked about this evening is effective communication. This slide summarises some of the ideas I've shared. Let me leave you with one final observation. Over the last 20 minutes or so, I've talked a lot about planning. A plan isn't a statue, it's a tool. It needs to be maintained as the passage of time exposes optimism, pessimism, or revenue shortfalls. Failure to plan is fundamentally different to failure of plan. Plans do fail, sometimes often. That's why they need to be malleable. Regularly check the alignment of your plan against reality. Tweak as necessary. Thus concludes the lesson. And if I click this button up here, we get to go back and look at Ren's smiling face.
Hello. I just want to say one thing in the wake of Cameron's amazing presentation. 3MDR has 2 part-time staff and we have basically none of what he has in place. So I just want to let everyone out there know that, and Cameron did preface his whole presentation with the fact that he works at a larger station and is employed by them. But these are all starting points. And I would really encourage you, I mean, I'll be taking it basically straight back to our committee and our tech team as well, and looking to put lots of those things into place. I would encourage you all to not think about it as being really overwhelming. It's just get started. Get started with something that you have going. If you've got an asset register, start putting even just how old things are in it. You know, your pieces of technology and things like that. And yeah, start reaching out to other techs like Cameron was talking about and get some of those lifetime numbers for technology pieces that you've got at your station. Where I'll tell you a funny tech story just while anyone's thinking of questions. Today, I got in touch with OMB, which are a Spanish run company for our, we've got an old transmitter link that needs repairing, and it was made in 1992, and I had to send the guy a picture of it because he had no idea what about the serial number that I asked him about like a schematic for, and he sent me back what they had, which is in Spanish, but the pictures are not, which is helpful, and numbers are not. So I've sent that on to our tech and to send to our gear servicer. So yeah, that's, you know, some tech is 30 years old and it's still fine. So, but yeah, sometimes you have to do that fun schematic / service manual, not operator manual. Operation manuals are no good when you need service manuals. I learned this today. So So
Can I
every
jump in
day's
for a
a school
sec?
day. Yeah.
Yeah, as I said at the top, that's not a recipe. If you took one of the things that I put on the table there and started working from there, you'd be better off than if you did nothing at all. And there is no panacea. But the point that Ren was just making there about the age of some of our tech, if we don't document stuff and we don't have plans, or if we have plans and they're misaligned with the station's strategic plan, then tech ultimately will fail. As I said, I've been in the industry for a long time, and so I can remember the console that's sitting to my right here when it rolled off the assembly line, and we were all ooh and ah about it. It's kind of ironic that I'm working at a station and maintaining it 30 years later. But the key thing here is that a lot of us won't be around in another 30 years' time, so that the assets that our stations acquire today, if they're not documented, we don't know when we bought it. We don't know what it cost when we bought it. We don't have any idea about what it's going to cost to replace it. Then you're putting your station leadership at risk. You're putting them at a legal risk, because as the board of a company, they have some obligations to maintain the solvency of the company. And so if you're sitting on a whole bunch of potential costs that your station doesn't know about, that's something that you should be starting to work at. And so if you wanted a place to start, I'd say, well, I'd hope you'd have an asset register and that you're getting some whatever tax benefit you can from depreciation. The amortization that I talked about is not that different from depreciation, and it has a different end point, but the approach is somewhat the same. Get a sense of how much you need to sock away each year so that you can replace the CD players when they fail in 3 years' time.
Yeah, I would also encourage anyone whose board or station leadership isn't here, or anyone whose tech isn't here, to send the recording of this webinar to them. I think it's a really important conversation starter between those two groups to kind of get things happening and to get conversations going. It's been a tricky thing at our station. Like Cameron was saying, you know, we don't really have a lot of those things in place. It is dial tone. You become too reliant on your tech as well, on your volunteer technologists, mostly volunteer. And then one day when they decide to retire, or, you know, they've had enough or something like that, then that's really the high risk situation that the station is then left in. So these conversations are tricky, and I have been sitting in the middle of these conversations for a long time between techs and boards, and trying to manage and, you know, bridge gaps and do all those kinds of things. And it doesn't start until someone actually just starts having the conversation. And if you look at it from a purely risk management perspective, and if you go into them and you say, well, you know, we don't want to be off air regardless of any circumstances, then I think that's a really good way for everything to get started. Yeah, I think, I don't know about Cameron. I was about to say something and I can't speak for him, but I'm really happy if people do take this presentation away and maybe they need some help in maybe how to start that conversation, or what should we aim for first, or we've got this, but how do we build in that, or whatever. Like, I'm really happy for people to email me or whatever. And you can do that via the CMTO. They've got our contact details. And, you know, I'm more than happy to spend, you know, a little bit of time with people, you know, if they want to start having these conversations and getting the ball rolling with their tech and with their board. Oh, awesome. We've got a question. I knew if I talked long enough, we'd get one. Gabrielle, hello, I have a question. Eastside Radio has changed their specifications on the net. I'm trying to listen to the radio while overseas on my pure internet radio. Am I unable? And I'm unable to. What can I do? I do not want to listen on my computer, but on my internet radio. Oh my God, I have no idea about that.
Well, I can have a crack at it. I reckon your pure radio is using HTTP, and most stations now are being encouraged by large organizations like the Google to use HTTPS. And sadly, if your pure radio or Pure, the company, which is just a marketing organization, I have to say, are not offering an upgrade to the software in your radio, East Side Radio has just dropped off your listening agenda. But I'm sure there are other avenues that you can listen to East Side Radio's internet stream.
The old HTTPS. Mary, you'll be able to get a recording. I'm pretty sure all attendees will get a link email. Is that right, Michaela? Yes, lots of nodding. Peter would like to know, Cameron, nice turntable, what cartridge are you using?
I'm tempted to unclip the camera, but I'm now going to blush because I was smugly thinking before when you were saying about nailing things down in studios. Well, we don't do that here, but we did nail the webcams down, largely because we found that when people were swinging the screens around, they fell on the floor. So I can't wander over there with the webcam to let you see the cartridge. It will be a Stanton something, and I'm useless at fortunately, I have team members who will remind me. I know the microphone I'm talking to is a Sennheiser 421, but that's about the only part number of an object that I manage that I can ever recall.
Gabrielle, I don't know what OS hits is. Do you mean HTTPS potentially, which is a secure browser thing? So it's the HTTP and then the S is a secure. It's a security thing.
Correct.
So
the issue is not with the protocol, it's with the radio's capacity to understand what you're trying to ask it to do.
Yeah, maybe you might need to see if there's a software upgrade available for your internet radio.
We could go off into a whole Technorama session about built-in obsolescence and companies like Pure that market something that they know will not be supported beyond 3 years.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, techs make the decisions of buying that crap too. My junk drawer is full of things that I bought that I assumed, and a Pure radio is one of them, that I assumed would have user upgradable software inside. Sadly, it does not. My colleague Nick has one that doesn't even listen to DAB Plus anymore. Doesn't listen. He bought it in the UK, brought it back to Australia. Their test transmissions in Australia used a format. That format changed. The working assumption was that Pure would update the radio, and they never did.
So Linda, that is the quintessential question about where to find technicians who understand RF transmission. Unfortunately, in Australia at the moment, I'm talking now as a Technorama board person. Unfortunately, in Australia at the moment, there is no training available apart from going to university to become an RF engineer. There is no communications technology training available. You can go and do your ham radio license, which will actually teach you a lot of what you need to know around radio transmission. And I say that confidently because I started doing mine. It is something Technorama and CMTO are currently working on to fill as a massive skill gap in that whole environment. So at the moment, you could reach out to neighbouring stations to see if there is anyone available technologically wise to assist you with that. Otherwise, get on to Technorama. So I'm just Ren at technorama.org, I think, maybe .au. Let me check that. And part of our role is to facilitate that kind of conversation between stations. Ren at technorama.org.au. It's good that I know my own email address. But yeah, we can potentially help link you in with someone depending on where your small rural town is. And the other option you have is there's a grant round coming up in September. So it could be worth doing some, thanks Michaela, it could be worth doing some homework around what a tech might cost to have on a even an honorarium or something you can offer them to pay them to come in more commercially as well, in order to have that, you know, bottom line kind of covered for maintenance and things like that. The other thing you could do is reach out to techs and universities that TAFEs and universities are around you, and see if any of them are offering any kind of RF qualification, like RF engineering qualification. Those students might be happy to come and do like placement or volunteer and things like that. So that might be another way of kind of getting around not having any techs at this station. I don't know where you are, so maybe get in touch and we might be able to have a bit more of a conversation offline. This one, I don't know the answer to this. Cameron, do you know how many stations are transmitting from Telstra towers and are concerned about Telstra's plans to sell off their towers?
Rob, I'm sorry I missed your call on the weekend, and I'm sure it wasn't that question you were going to ask me. That's a somewhat inflammatory question. I broadcast from a tower that I don't own. And one could argue that my station is in a better negotiating position than 2Bob is, but I don't think it's an existential crisis. I think someone will acquire the assets and will rent you the space. Whether you can afford that, well, that's a conversation for the future. But I wouldn't be throwing. No, I won't use that metaphor. That would be appalling.
I think they will acquire them. It's a true thing. So we are also transmitting not from our own gear, but it's a Yarra Valley Water tower, and like Optus are on it and stuff like that. So I agree. I think they'll get bought out by someone else, and hopefully you'll be able to negotiate an affordable rent. Yeah. So I'm not sure either.
We have to remember too, when stations are faced with options like that, you do have a voice, and you do have a community that presumably supports you, and some grassroots mobilisation of that community to let them know the new ownership or the proposed transfer of ownership. Let the people who are organising that know about the displeasure. That said, that's not going to guarantee that you'll still keep transmitting. So start working on a plan B.
Yes, that's a good plan. Yeah, cool. No worries, Linda. I'll see how you go. It was an issue of being kicked off one of our transmitters due to interference with a TV station.
Yes. Well, for the station that finds themselves in that predicament, that's pretty ugly. Nonetheless, as broadcasters, we have some obligations not to stamp over the transmission of other broadcasters. And that suggests to me there are other transmitter engineers in the room, but who can answer this more authoritatively than me. But that suggests that someone who's got a clue should be looking at your transmitter.
Yeah, and also talking to ACMA about your license and where they're overlapping, and geographically, we had that issue once. We were transmitting, I don't know, probably too strongly, and it went into someone else. ABC Radio started edging in onto like our area of transmission license area, and they had to down their transmitter because it was seen that they were actually encroaching using the same. So 97.1 is what we are. So they were using the same frequency but butting into our area. So I don't like being called ACMA. The ACMA may also be able to help with those kinds of issues, because just because it's a television station doesn't mean it gets priority over community radio. It really does come down to your license area and what you're licensed to broadcast at. There's levels, like how much power you're pumping out into your broadcast, and the ACMA can definitely help with that. I'm with you, Alan. I'm hungry too and I need to cook food. I think we're done. I think we might be done.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks so much, Ren and Cameron. So yes, the recording will be sent around to everyone, and upon completion or me clicking the end button on the webinar, you'll also receive a link to some feedback. So if you want to pop in anything you want to ask, like additional questions for Ren and Cameron, I'd be happy to send them through, and also email info@cmto.org.au for their contact details as well. But hope everyone has a really great night, and thank you so much for attending.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Bye.